Alright, here's part 3 of my tier list series, and today we're going to be discussing Flame. The reason why I'm doing this is because you mainly want to focus on one element, but I want to go ahead and disclaimer myself because you may find characters higher or lower on this tier list depending on your situation, but at the end of the day, this is my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about the current playstyle of Flame, which I'm going to be basing my rankings off of. So Leola is a hyper carry who's mainly going to be on the field doing normal attacks and dodges, but she has the added benefit of providing a lot of charge, allowing you to switch to your supports so that way you can activate their discharges to provide even more damage. So let's go ahead and start this tier list off by talking about the standard characters, and the first one being King, and I'm going to have to rate him as a C. So King's main focus is a Shatterer, and how he does that is usually by activating his discharge. He can also use his skill, but it has a very long skill cooldown. But his shattering capabilities are conditional. He generally brings more damage if he's able to shatter an enemy shield, on top of having multiple enemies on the field as well. So now let's talk about his matrices, to where his 2-piece was actually pretty powerful when the game first started. To where if you were going to have a shatter unit on your team, you would generally have a 2-piece Shiro or a 2-piece King. But now, as pointed out in my previous video, we have Scylla matrices, which are better shattering matrices than even Shiros, even at low stars. So now the best shattering matrices would be a 2-piece Shiro, 2-piece Scylla. His 4-piece effect is just not very good compared to other matrices, which unfortunately brings King matrices to a D. Next we have Huma, and unfortunately I have to rate her as a D. She is a very good shatterer in the game, but the main way how she shatters is by dodging, and all of the top tier DPS desperately want their dodges. So let's go ahead and take a look at her matrices, mainly her 2-piece effect, which was actually pretty good, especially at the start of the game, when you combine these with Frigg and her multi/dodge, but now these are mostly outscaled by most matrices in the game, and her 4-piece is not very good, so I would have to rate these as a C. Bringing us to Zero, and I'm going to have to rate him as an S because he is a top tier support in the game, to where your healer will either have a Coco or a Zero in the game, and if you have 2 healers, you're going to see both of them. But Zero's discharge allows you to be immune from damage for a couple of seconds, which can be very helpful, especially when a boss is about to do a very powerful attack. On top of that, his discharge gives you max cubes, allowing you to heal and shield your teammates. And if you get him to 5-star, you're going to be able to produce orbs, allowing your teammates to do more damage and receive even more healing. And 6-star just makes this easier to do. Bringing us to his matrices, his 2-piece allows you to gain a very powerful shield when you discharge to the weapon that has the 0 matrices equipped. Where this ends up being really powerful is his 4-piece effect, to where if you have a shield active, you and your teammates get a very powerful damage buff. So I have to rate these matrices as an S as well. Then we have Cobalt, to where I'm going to have to rank her as a C. The main reason being is that she just does not work unless she is 6-star. Now she is in the standard banner, so you could pick her up with Blacko, but there's just better options like Claudia. Bringing us to her matrices, to where her 2-piece effect is one of the strongest in the game, especially for DPS matrices. The only problem is that targets have to be debuffed, but Flame constantly debuffs their targets, allowing you to replace the mirror matrices, which have a stacking mechanic. So the best DPS matrices, at least for Flame, is 2-piece Lyra, 2-piece Cobalt. Her 4-piece is actually not bad, especially if you really need dodges for your team, but other 4-pieces usually beat this. But due to how valuable this is for DPS matrices for the Flame team, I'm gonna have to rate this as an S. Which brings us to Ruby, and I'm gonna have to rate her as a B. She's mainly a main DPS/Shatterer. As a main DPS, the other characters on this list beat her, and as a Shatterer, she's pretty good, but the only problem is that she needs to stay on the field for quite a while to really break those shields. And then we have her matrices, to where her 2-piece increases your flame attack after casting a skill, but sadly it does not work in the background. And then her 4-piece is very strong, but unfortunately it is a stacking mechanic. So once you switch off the character that has these matrices, you lose all those stacks. So unfortunately I have to rate these as a B. Bringing us to Annabella, to where I'm gonna have to rate her as an A. Now she is a main DPS, and when she originally came out she was not very strong, but she has got quite a few buffs since then, to where she's almost as strong as Leola. And I would recommend trying to get her to 5-star so that way you can get that resistance shred. But she still has a few problems. Her shots have a chance of missing the target, lowering your DPS. And it can be a little bit annoying trying to activate her skill. Bringing us to her matrices. Her 2-piece increases the final damage and crit rate that these matrices are attached to, meaning that it does not work in the background. Whereas the 4-piece increases the final damage even more, but also increases crit damage. but it also has the added benefit of restoring dodge attacks, which is greatly needed for Annabella if she wants to compete with Leola. So the way these matrices function is that they will be replacing DPS matrices, which could be a downgrade depending on which characters you're using. But since these matrices are basically a requirement for Annabella, I'm gonna rate these as an A. Which brings us to Lan, and I'm gonna have to rate her as an A. She's mainly a shatterer, but an extremely good buffer for the flame team. If you can get her A1, it greatly increases her shatter and greatly increases the damage of your main DPS on the flame team. I would have rated her an S if not for the fact that Fize is coming in 2 banners, and she will replace Lan, to where you might want to just save your rolls so that we can get a high starred Fize. But when it comes to tanking, she is an S tier. You definitely want to make sure that you get at least 1 star, and you can consider getting a 3 star so that way you can reduce the enemy's attack. Bringing us to her matrices, to where her 2-piece increases the flame attack and the flame damage as long as you have 1 flame weapon on the team. To where her 4-piece increases the elemental damage based off the weapons equipped to the team, and the final damage based off the altar weapons equipped to the team. But there's still quite a few limited matrices that beat hers, so I'm going to have to rate these as an A. Bringing us to Leola, and I'm going to have to rate her as an S. Currently, she is the strongest main DPS that you can get for the flame team, and her rotation is not that complicated either. It's maybe a little bit more difficult than Zeke's, but less complicated than Yulan's. On top of that, Leola is really strong even if she's at A0. But ideally, you would like to get her to A3 since she is a close combat character, and A3 allows you to heal yourself fairly quickly. Which brings us to her matrices. Her 2-piece increases your final damage, and it also allows you to get Sparrow Feathers much easier. But it is pretty easy to get Sparrow Feathers even without these matrices. Then her 4-piece increases your elemental damage, so these are not bad matrices. But when you compare them to matrices like Icarus or Genono, which greatly increases the elemental damage for their respective element, or the newest Domain 9 matrices like Yulan's or Zeke's, these matrices are a little lackluster. And the future Fize matrices should be equal, if not stronger, than Leola matrices. So I'm gonna have to rate these as an A. Bringing us to the support element Altar, and the first one that we need to talk about is Lyn, and I'm going to rate her as a C, to where she does not bring much for the flame team, and you still want to try to have her at a 6 star to really bring out her damage, which I don't recommend. But if you did want to try to do an Altar team, you could consider getting 1 copy. Bringing us to her matrices, to where her 2-piece increases attack, but it does have a stacking mechanic, whereas her 4-piece increases final damage, but you have to have Lyn on the team and you have to be inside her field. Due to all these constraints, I'm going to rate these as a D. Bringing us to Fiona, and I'm going to rate her as a B. The main reason being is that Fiona is very powerful for the flame team, but the scatter techniques that you want to use are Hydro Focus and Wellspring, and to really take advantage of Wellspring, you need to have 1.6 million HP, which is very difficult to get. On top of that, Fiona causes this team to be in the balance residence, lowering its DPS. And she has already got kicked off the meta team due to Zeke, but she is still used in Sequential Phantasm, so it is still nice to have. But I wouldn't really recommend no more than 1 copy. But as mentioned in my previous video, if you are trying to be a healer, Fiona is an S tier, due to all the buffs that she can bring for her teammates, especially if you can get her to 3 star. Because she's able to execute her opponents at a higher HP threshold if you're in benediction mode. And then when it comes to her matrices, her 2-piece does grant you a lot of attack, but this may not be worth if it prevents you from getting a very powerful 4-piece. And her 4-piece greatly increases final damage, but she has to be on the team. And currently, right now, she's already being kicked off the current flame team. Due to this, I'm going to have to rate her matrices as a B. But if you are a healer, these matrices are really powerful, to where they increase your teammates' final damage. So I would have to rate these as an S. Bringing us to our last support, Zeke, to where I have to rate him as an S. Also, with Zeke replacing Fiona, he makes up for a lot of her faults. Now you're in attack resistance instead of being in balance, making you stronger, and you don't have to worry about meeting the HP thresholds for Fiona's scatter technique, Wellspring. His only downside is that he does not work in Sequential Phantasm because he's considered a physical unit. Bringing us to his matrices, his 2-piece greatly increases the flame attack of the team, rivaling Lan's matrices, whereas his 4-piece greatly increases the final damage, which rivals Fiona's. But if Zeke's on the team, your flame attack increases even more. Due to this, I'm going to have to rate these matrices as an S. And again, I wanted to mention that these ratings were a bit lower due to the fact that Fies is coming out in 2 banners, to where she should replace Lon and her matrices should replace Leola's. But here you can see all the characters and matrices that I mentioned. Hopefully this will help you decide on which characters to pick for the flame element. And look forward to my vote tier list coming out later. But do you agree with my tier list? Let me know down in the comments. But other than that, I'll talk with you guys later.